This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one country or one leader or one protest. This is about something quieter than war and more dangerous than peace. What you are watching unfold right now is a new way power moves. No invasion, no declaration. No lines crossed on a map. Just pressure, ambiguity, signals that travel faster than armies. And once this method works, it does not stay contained. It becomes reusable. Because the most efficient way to break a system is not to attack it directly. It is to make it collapse from the inside. While everyone argues about whether anything actually happened, you are not being asked to take a side. You are being asked to notice a pattern. If this sounds distant, it won't for long, because this model does not stop at borders. It scales. Stay with me. Because what looks like restraint is actually the opening move. What controls this system now is not tanks, it is leverage. Not leverage over territory. Leverage over behavior. The center of gravity has shifted away from governments and toward pressure points. Money flows, information access, reputational fear, conditional consequences. Power no longer needs to occupy. It only needs to interrupt. Interrupt revenue. Interrupt communication. Interrupt certainty. And most importantly, interrupt the belief that internal actions remain internal. This is why the warnings matter less than the conditions attached to them. They redraw the boundary of sovereignty without ever announcing it. When a state is told that how it treats its own people may trigger external force, the system has already changed. This is not diplomacy replacing war. This is war learning how to hide, because ambiguity is cheaper, cleaner, easier to deny. And once denial is built into the architecture, accountability dissolves. What you're seeing is not chaos. It's a controlled experiment, and it didn't start yesterday. It's been moving quietly for years, which brings us to the shift almost everyone missed. The most dangerous change is never the loud one. It's the one that feels reasonable while it's happening. There was a time when intervention meant something unmistakable. Troops, déclarations, an event you could point to and say, this is when it began. Now compare that to what involvement looks like today. Pressure applied without fingerprints. Warnings issued without timelines. Consequences implied, not defined. Before, escalation was a staircase. Each step visible, each one debated. Now it's a slope. You don't notice you're sliding until you're already moving too fast to stop. This shift was normalized slowly. Sanctions became routine. Cyber actions became deniable. Information access became a weapon rather than a right. And because none of this looked like war, it didn't trigger resistance. It triggered acceptance. The system learned something critical. You can change behavior without ever declaring intent. And once that lesson is learned, it doesn't stay theoretical. It looks for stress fractures, for moments of internal strain, for crises that can be nudged rather than confronted, which is exactly what happens next. When the system finally shows itself, it doesn't arrive as a theory. It arrives as a number, a death toll, a blackout, a sudden silence where information used to be people take to the streets. The response is immediate, forceful, lethal. Then the lights go out, not metaphorically. Digitally, a country is cut off from itself. Phones stop working. Videos stop uploading. The outside world is sealed away. This looks like control. It looks like authority reasserting itself. But inside this shock is the tell, because the moment a government has to blind its own population to survive, it's no longer managing dissent. It's managing exposure. And that exposure is exactly what this new system is built to exploit. If you're still with me, stay. Because what happens next is not about the crackdown. It's about why it no longer works the way it used to. Because the blackout didn't hold, and that changes everything. Here's how the system actually works. It waits for pressure to build internally, economic stress, public anger, a legitimacy gap, then it does not intervene directly. It changes the environment. Revenue becomes fragile, currency weakens, workers hesitate, information becomes porous. Even when it's supposed to be sealed, the state absorbs the damage first, not the people applying the pressure. And the costs are uneven by design. Leadership must pay security forces, must maintain loyalty, must keep money moving. But when a system lives paycheck to paycheck, any interruption becomes existential. This is why labor matters more than protest. Why oil matters more than slogans. The street creates visibility. The strike creates collapse. And the brilliance, or the danger, of this architecture is that no one has to order it. Pressure cascades, choices narrow. Those who benefit are distant. Those who absorb the damage are local. And once this mechanism is activated, it does not need escalation. It needs patience. Because now the system is turning inward and the clock is no longer neutral, which leads to the second shock. Now everything accelerates. The response gets harsher. Sentences get shorter. Tolerance disappears. No legal leniency, no negotiation, no exit ramps. Force becomes the default language, but force is expensive, and fear burns cash fast. Security needs funding. Silence needs enforcement. Control needs constant maintenance. Meanwhile, the flow of money slows. Workers hesitate. Production wobbles. Not because of ideology, because uncertainty spreads faster than orders. This is where systems start making mistakes, overreacting, misreading signals, doubling down too late. Every crackdown creates a new trigger. Every death widens the conditions set for involvement. And the paradox tightens. Use force, risk external response. Don't use force, risk internal collapse. There is no stable middle anymore. That's when leadership stops thinking strategically and starts reacting emotionally. That's when decisions get loud. Public, irreversible, and once that happens, this is no longer a domestic crisis. It's a countdown. This is where it reaches you. Not as a headline, as a pressure, because when systems like this activate, they don't ask who you voted for. They don't care what side you're on. They don't pause for moral clarity. They move through ordinary life. Prices shift, markets flinch. Energy becomes volatile, and uncertainty leaks outward. You feel it when stability becomes conditional, when rules feel temporary, when decisions somewhere else start shaping your week. This is the cost of ambiguity. It spreads. You're told this is contained, that it's far away, that it's someone else's crisis. But systems don't work that way anymore. The same tools used to pressure one government become templates, reusable, scalable, portable. If you're watching closely, keep watching. Because understanding this now is the only defense you get, and what happens next is what happens when this model leaves its original theater. Once this model proves it can work, it doesn't stay local. It ripples. Markets adjust first, quietly. Insurance prices, energy futures, shipping routes. Then governments recalibrate, not publicly, internally. They watch what happens to a state under pressure without a formal war being declared. They notice how quickly allies align, how cautiously rivals respond, how silence becomes a strategy. This is how a regional crisis turns systemic. Because when sovereignty becomes conditional, every government starts asking the same question. What would trigger this for us? Information control looks weaker. Economic dependence looks riskier. Internal unrest looks more dangerous than before. And the map doesn't redraw itself all at once. It blurs. Lines soften. Rules bend. Norms erode without being officially repealed. Nothing explodes. Nothing resolves. But everyone feels the shift. This is the moment where stability stops being assumed and starts being negotiated. And no one is sure who sets the terms anymore. Which brings us to what happens next. From here, the system has three possible directions. The first is adjustment. Pressure works just enough, behavior changes, the structure survives, altered but intact, control is restored without collapse. The second is erosion. Nothing breaks all at once. Authority weakens, revenue thins. Compliance becomes performative. The system keeps functioning, but only barely. And every future crisis becomes harder to contain. Then there is rupture. That's when multiple pressures converge. Economic interruption, information leakage, loss of loyalty, not revolution as spectac, but failure as cascade. This is the path no one names out loud, because it's the one no one can manage once it starts. And here's the destabilizing truth. The system doesn't choose the path. Momentum does. Decisions made under fear, signals misread, warnings taken too seriously or not seriously enough. At this stage, restraint and escalation begin to look identical, and that's when history accelerates. There's a temptation at moments like this to look for reassurance, for a sign that someone is in control, that the system has guardrails, but this system was designed to function without them. No declaration, no single decision point, no moment you can rewind to and say, that's where it went wrong. Just a sequence of pressures that feel rational on their own and irreversible when combined. What makes this dangerous is not intent. It's efficiency. A model that avoids war, outsources risk, and distributes damage quietly will be used again. Not because it's evil, because it works. And once that logic takes hold, every crisis becomes an opportunity to test it. So the question is no longer whether this ends well. It's whether we'll recognize the pattern before it's applied somewhere closer, somewhere familiar. This isn't the end of the story. It's the template. If you want to understand what comes next, you'll need to keep watching. Not for explosions, but for pressure, because the next move won't announce itself either. Stay with me.